So I will start with, as I mentioned, with a few simple examples, and I'm using the ISE with the possibility to use run select. One of the reasons for that is my right arm at the moment is injured, so I'm trying to do everything with the left hand, so I have to reduce my typing. Anyway, so okay, so here I'm going to log into an Office 365 tenant. And of course, and this is the first one of the things that have to be remembered, or things that of course that have to be done, is to make sure that the right and the necessary modules, PowerShell modules, are installed, which is the Office 365 module, could be the Azure modules or additional modules. So of course, this is something that I have to do now as an administrator, and now we see that the commandlets are being loaded, so I'm having an implicit session to be able to work with my Office 365 tenant, and I'm starting with this simple get user command here to find out, okay, am I connected, and okay, do I have some users here, which is the case. They're all musicians, so we are talking about an interesting mixture of musicians, bands, and styles. So, and of course, these people are constantly on the road. So that's why we are going to look into the out-of-office scenario here mainly, which means, okay, I of course can use PowerShell one-liner to just find out what is the current status of the auto reply configuration of a particular user. And if I'm doing that, I'm getting the information that at the moment we see, okay, this auto reply state is in scheduled mode. And then I also have some text here that is already configured as an external message and an internal message. And then, of course, I could also look at this information for multiple users and stuff like that. And of course, I can also use it to set out of office information, which again, I'm using the mailbox auto reply configuration in the first step in the simple mode, where I'm just enabling it. I'm running it, and it's configured with an internal message and an external message. And the next step, of course, I can go and say, okay, I want to have it scheduled, so I'm starting to use a start date and an end date, which can be seen here, right on the right side here. I have a start time and an end time, and so these are all things that I as an administrator, of course, can do. So I can, as I mentioned, simply start with one-liners like this, very simple to use. And of course, when I've set this configuration, again, I can do a get command just to find out, okay, is the information configured correctly? So it's still scheduled, and then I have an end date, and I'm having a start date. So that worked out for this guy here. And then, of course, if all these musicians are going on tour together, then you would not like to do that one by one, then, because that would, well, we're talking about automation, right? So in this case, I would go for something like this, where I say, okay, I want to do that for my whole list of users instead of doing it manually. And so this is how step by step this one-liners evolve into scripts and into solutions that you as an administrator can very easily use to automate your daily life. All right, so so this is some typical scenario where, yeah, somebody who is familiar with PowerShell, who has the necessary permissions, in this case for Office 365, is able to use PowerShell to do things like enabling, disabling, in our scenario here, the mailbox auto reply configuration. Could be anything else with creating mailboxes or adding, removing addresses from a distribution list and stuff like that. So this is, as I mentioned in the slide before, is typically the first step to start to do things with PowerShell, to use the real power of PowerShell, and digging deeper into that matters step by step. And then at one point in time, maybe there comes the situation where you say, okay, now I am the PowerShell expert, and I've built and I've developed a number of PowerShell scripts, and now I would like to not just use it myself, but I would maybe like to delegate this stuff to maybe people in the administration team, but maybe also to people in the service desk team, or maybe even to end users to do and to solve, as we mentioned before, to solve things like, okay, who is able to create out of office configurations? Because before we had PowerShell, we had an even bigger issue, because if somebody would have to, let's say somebody falls sick and is not able to activate out of office settings themselves, then the administrator would have to have the permissions to go into the mailbox, get full access, and to configure whatever is necessary, and then activate this out of office settings, which in itself is not just a technical, or was not just a technical issue, but also a problem on the process side, because who is allowed to do that? Who gives these people full access to the mailbox? Who has to approve that? Is it are these the managers or several managers that have to agree on to do that? So that's, fortunately, that is gone with PowerShell, because here you just really need to have the permissions to run that commandlet. But still, you need of course privileged access to be able to do that. And this is one of the typical boundaries, if you will, if you're thinking about how to actually delegate this task to, for example, people from the help desk team, because in most of the cases you would never ever want or would be allowed to give them the privileged access to do things in Exchange or in Exchange Online.